Flora was revered as the guiding light and the very own saint of her people. In stark contrast, her younger sister silently questioned her own place in the dark shadows. She lamented being nothing more than Flora's completely disgraced baby sister. One evening, a grand soirée unfolded in the majestic kingdom of Celestia. The opulent hall buzzed with the lively hubbub of gathering nobles. Suddenly, clamorous cries erupted as distressed attendees rushed to check on Maria. A frantic aristocrat closely examined a fresh scrape on the distressed girl's beautiful face. Whispers rapidly spread that Maria had fallen during a dance, potentially ruining her marriage prospects. A furious noblewoman immediately blamed the dark-haired girl for causing the unfortunate incident. The angry aristocrat aggressively demanded to know how the accused would take responsibility for the disaster. A calm voice suddenly cut through the heavy tension, politely urging the lady not to fret. The crowd parted with a sharp clack of heels as everyone immediately recognized the approaching voice. The gorgeous Lady Flora magnanimously offered to heal the injured girl's wounds. Flora gently asked to see Maria's face as the injured girl's heart pounded with sheer anticipation. Radiant healing magic glittered brilliantly from Flora's outstretched hands over the minor injury. With a soft hiss and a warm glow, the scrape miraculously vanished from the girl's cheek. The crowd gasped in astonishment, marveling that the instantaneous healing left no trace of the injury behind. The nobles enthusiastically declared that the flawless Flora Sanchez must become their next saint. Flora stood proudly as the eldest daughter of Celestia's one and only ducal family. Few lineages in the nation's storied history could ever rival the immense prestige of the Sanchez family. Befitting her noble bloodline, Flora's natural aptitude for holy magic remained truly exceptional. She was destined to undergo the blessed trials and officially attain the revered title of saint. Greeting the guests with grace, Flora had just graduated at the top of her class at the Royal Academy. Hailed as the consummate prodigy, she seamlessly executed her every action to absolute perfection. The narrator solemnly confirmed that this radiant, perfect prodigy was her own sister. Meanwhile, someone mockingly addressed the narrator as Lady Carolina, highlighting her stark contrast to Flora. Cruel snickers followed as the aristocratic tormentor claimed she hadn't even noticed Carolina standing there. Carolina stood in quiet humiliation as she absorbed the targeted mockery without uttering a single word. Carolina politely returned the greeting to Lady Ariella, acknowledging the supposedly good evening. Ariella ruthlessly asked Carolina how it felt to blend in completely with the background wallpaper. She snidely remarked that the Duke should have appropriately attired his precious daughter for the event. Ariella cruelly suggested that even the noble Sanchez's willfully ignored animal like Carolina. Clenching her dress, Carolina felt her mediocrity marred the distinguished Sanchez family tree while Ariella mocked her silence. She accepted it was inevitable to be compared to Flora since their abilities and appearances were worlds apart. The cruel members of high society had taken to calling Carolina the absolute disgrace of the Sanchez family. Gripping her dress tightly, Carolina silently insisted the girls were wrong and that her suffering stemmed from something else entirely. With a sharp clack of heels, Flora arrived and gracefully asked the bullies to refrain from teasing her dear baby sister. Flora smoothly defended Carolina by stating that she was only wearing the plain dress because it was her favorite. The crowd chattered nervously as Flora fiercely demanded if they were implying how Sanchez could not take care of their own. Stammering in sudden panic, Ariella desperately insists that she meant no harm to Lady Flora. The other nervous nobles quickly agree that they would never dare besmirch the mighty Sanchez name. Flora smoothly reassures the frantic girls before pointedly asking if her dear sister Carolina understands. Carolina hesitates quietly under the suffocating weight of the aristocratic crowd's judging gaze. Anxious chatter and sharp whispers instantly ripple through the tense, watching audience. Clapping her hands together, Flora brightly declares her absolute love for a happy ending. Bidding the gathered nobles a polite farewell, Flora gracefully announces their immediate departure. The clueless audience enthusiastically whispers praises of Lady Flora's boundless beauty and caring grace. Leaning in close, Flora sinisterly mocks Carolina for always requiring her older sister's rescue. Flora coldly whispers that her disgraced sibling serves as an excellent foil to her own radiant perfection. With a vicious sneer, Flora taunts that even a pathetic disgrace can still serve a highly useful purpose. Flora openly mocks the tasteless gown, brutally admitting she forced Carolina into it purely for public humiliation. Carolina silently realizes the sickening truth behind her sister's carefully orchestrated display of cruelty. Overwhelmed by dark memories, Carolina reflects that this malicious torment was far from an isolated incident. Rattling loudly over the cobblestones, the luxurious carriage rolls through the night to guarantee further abuse. The rhythmic clip-clop of heavy horse hooves echoes sharply against the freezing night streets. Trapped inside the carriage, Flora venomously questions their father's sanity for making them share a ride. Flora bitterly complains that the Duke returned home only to immediately abandon them by taking the other carriages. Glaring silently at the wall, Carolina fumes over her sister's ridiculous assumption that she enjoys this close proximity. Flora aggressively snaps at Carolina's glare and violently demands proper respect for her dear older sister. Erupting in sheer fury, Flora berates Carolina as an ungrateful brat and a permanent stain on their family tree. Taking twisted pleasure in the abuse, Flora cruelly questions if Carolina even possesses true Sanchez blood. Flora sharply highlights that Carolina's ash-gray hair matches neither their father's icy blonde nor their mother's raven tresses. Glaring with unbridled disgust, Flora brands Carolina's eerie blood-red eyes as utterly revolting. Flora ruthlessly declares that her younger sister is nothing more than a freak within their pristine lineage. Leaning forward aggressively, Flora viciously questions what gives a pathetically mediocre runt the right to exist. Carolina flinches violently as Flora screams that she possesses absolutely no right to call herself a Sanchez. Sighing with absolute disdain, Flora glares heavily down at the silently trembling young girl. Flora venomously demands to know why their beloved mother had to die for a catastrophic failure like Carolina. Carolina sorrowfully absorbs the devastating blow, remembering the tragic truth that their mother died giving birth to her. She gazes sadly into the darkness, completely burdened by the quiet guilt of never knowing her own mother. Shadowy whispers from the past echo in Carolina's mind regarding the Duke's dreadful state and immense suffering. The phantom voices of aristocrats lament that everything would be perfect if only the Duchess were still around. The murmuring nobles fondly recall how the late Duchess brought immense magnanimity and boundless boons to their great house. Carolina painfully reflects on how profoundly both her distant father and Flora adored the perfect matriarch. She tragically acknowledges that the absolute treasure of their lives was violently snatched away by sudden death. Shrinking into herself, Carolina bears the crushing reality that she was left behind as a thoroughly broken replacement. Staring blankly into the endless void, Carolina desperately wonders if she ever should have come into this world at all. Suddenly, a familiar voice sharply pierces the oppressive silence by calling out directly to Lady Carolina. Carolina freezes in the empty hallway as a dutiful maid suddenly approaches her with urgent news. The polite servant respectfully informs Carolina that His Grace is currently waiting for her in the drawing room. Astonished that her distant father actually summoned her, Carolina anxiously knocks on the heavy wooden door. The massive door swings open as the royal servant formally announces Lady Carolina's arrival to the waiting Duke. Stepping cautiously into the opulent room, Carolina nervously excuses her sudden intrusion into the private space. Her crimson eyes widen in sheer disbelief as she immediately spots a highly unexpected royal guest waiting inside. A casual voice warmly greets Carolina as she freezes completely in absolute shock at the towering figure. Recognizing His Royal Majesty instantly, Carolina gasps as King Nathan Phillips notes it has been a long time. The Duke harshly reprimands Carolina for staring blankly and strictly demands that she immediately show proper manners. Dropping gracefully into a hasty bow, Carolina humbly begs pardon for her highly delayed introduction to the king. King Nathan Phillips warmly waves off her frantic apology and casually commands the trembling girl to sit down. Bowing deeply, the Prime Minister Duke asks for her pardon while the king casually dismisses the rigid formality. Taking her designated seat, Carolina nervously confirms to the smiling king that she is doing perfectly all right. Laughing heartily about health being true wealth, King Nathan beams as Carolina politely returns his royal well wishes. The strict Duke suddenly interrupts the king's boastful claim about never being sick with a sharp call to order. Sighing heavily at Raymond's strict business demeanor, the king solemnly urges the Duke to proceed with the meeting. Turning his cold gaze toward his daughter, the Duke firmly states she has surely surmised the dire situation. He grimly reveals they have summoned her regarding a critical political matter of utmost urgency and total secrecy. Staring intently at her, the Duke emphasizes that this massive burden is something they can only ask of her. The powerful men formally prepare to request that Carolina take on an incredibly vital royal duty for Celestia. They suddenly command her to officially marry Prince Edward of Malcosias without a single moment of delay. Stuttering in pure shock, Carolina struggles to comprehend the terrifying order as the king offers a full explanation. King Nathan grimly reveals that their nation is currently entangled in a highly dangerous dispute with the empire. He explains that one of their own foolishly committed a severe slight against the reigning emperor's own sister. The Malcosian Empire looms as a mighty global superpower whose vast territories occupy most of the entire continent. King Nathan details that the mighty empire boasts advanced destructive magic, high culture, and a massive military force. Sweating nervously, the king admits their humble kingdom has absolutely no business provoking such a massive beast. Instead of standard sanctions, the ruthless empire cruelly demands a suitable bride for Prince Edward as full reparation. Edward Ruby Martinez stands infamous for casting aside old knightly orders to fiercely forge the terrifying Pyreborn. Forging a bloody path of endless conquest, this terrifying commander is deeply feared globally for his absolute cruelty. Dark rumors paint him as a bloodthirsty hawk who actively revels in the brutal slaughter of women and children. Trembling in sheer horror, Carolina realizes she is being violently thrown to a literal bloodthirsty monster of war. The king solemnly admits that their political choices for an imperial prince's bride remain exceptionally few and far between. He gravely notes that his own royal daughter is already officially betrothed to another powerful foreign prince. The duke coldly states that Flora is completely exempt because she will permanently serve their country as its saint. Staring down at his youngest child, the duke ruthlessly declares she is the third and only viable remaining option. Carolina completely breaks down internally, realizing she is nothing but a disposable pawn married off for political ends. Staring blankly at her lap, she desperately asks God why this miserable and profoundly cruel fate must fall upon her. King Nathan gently asks for her compliance while Carolina silently wonders if she suffers simply because she is completely worthless. Glancing upward with heavy dread, Carolina silently absorbs the terrifying reality of her rapidly approaching political fate. Gritting her teeth intensely, she violently swallows the overwhelming anxiety completely threatening to consume her. Staring completely blankly ahead, the defeated girl silently surrenders to the crushing weight of her absolute powerlessness. Bowing her head in utter defeat, she softly but firmly accepts the terrifying royal decree without a single complaint. The imposing duke coldly announces that a special imperial envoy will officially arrive in exactly 3 days to collect her. Shocked by the impossibly tight deadline, she nods obediently as the powerful men fiercely stress the absolute secrecy of this dire mission. King Nathan abruptly breaks the heavy tension by solemnly calling out to the rigid Duke Raymond with a deeply serious tone. Stepping much closer, the reigning monarch earnestly offers a crucial word of parting advice to his oldest and most trusted friend. The king strongly urges Raymond to speak openly and honestly with his estranged daughter while precious time still permits. Waving a surprisingly casual goodbye, His Majesty cheerfully departs and leaves the highly confused father and daughter entirely alone. Listening closely to the rattling door, Carolina frantically wonders what the king's incredibly cryptic parting words actually meant. The suffocating silence abruptly shatters into pieces as Carolina lets out a sudden and totally ungraceful sneeze. Mortified by her own crudeness in front of her strict father, she desperately stammers a hasty and deeply embarrassed apology. To her absolute shock, the usually cold Duke silently wraps his own warm and heavy coat securely around her shivering shoulders. Expecting a terribly harsh scolding, she timidly thanks him as he gently notes that she must be freezing in her terribly thin dress. Staring blankly at his highly concerned face, Carolina reflects deeply on how extraordinarily rare their personal conversations truly are. She always knew him purely as the incredibly busy Duke and the king's most indispensable and ruthlessly efficient right-hand man. Consumed entirely by intense political duties, Raymond frequently abandoned their grand estate for agonizingly long months on end. Breaking her sorrowful train of thought, her highly distant father finally speaks her precious name with deeply uncharacteristic softness. Raymond anxiously asks if she is secretly harboring any second thoughts about officially marrying the terrifying Prince Edward. Shocking Carolina completely to her core, he boldly vows to convince the king to completely cancel this disastrous matrimonial arrangement. Stuttering in absolute disbelief, she frantically questions if he truly understands the catastrophic national consequences of actively defying the royal decree. Clenching his fists in sheer frustration, the staunchly patriotic Duke fiercely curses his own miserable and absolute powerlessness. Raymond bitterly acknowledges the agonizing reality that their incredibly small kingdom absolutely cannot defy the magically supreme empire. Trembling violently with suppressed rage, he furiously asks how he could ever accept his precious daughter being casually married off. Displaying truly unprecedented emotion, the furious father violently screams that they are mercilessly throwing her directly to the goddamned wolves. Carolina stares in total awe at the highly desperate man, rapidly realizing he is far more than just a stoic civil servant. Gripping his warm coat tightly, she sadly reflects that a massive disappointment like her hardly warrants such intense paternal agony. She tragically mutters that being the ultimate family disgrace makes her perfectly suited for this incredibly cruel sacrificial role. Erupting in highly protective fury, Raymond fiercely demands to know which blasted noble dared to call her a disgrace while she silently hides Flora's undeniable guilt. The deeply enraged Duke emphatically roars that every single word of that incredibly cruel gossip is nothing but utter nonsense. Leaning in with absolute conviction, Raymond fiercely declares that Carolina is his incredibly precious and most beloved daughter. His trembling voice cracking with heavy sorrow, he tenderly calls her his late wife Karen's absolute greatest parting gift to this entire world. Hot tears rapidly welling in her crimson eyes, Carolina finally realizes that her highly distant father has deeply loved her all along. She tearfully confesses her lifelong and deeply agonizing belief that he utterly hated her for tragically taking her mother's life during childbirth. Heavy tears stream freely down her pale cheeks as the suffocating, lifelong burden of feeling completely unloved finally shatters into nothingness. Smiling gently directly through her tears, she comfortingly tells her highly devastated father that she completely understands his absolutely impossible position. Acknowledging that even a powerful mountain mover like him is entirely powerless against the Empire, she bravely declares she harbors absolutely zero regrets. Standing incredibly tall with newfound absolute resolve, Carolina proudly requests his official permission to fulfill her terrifying duty as a true member of House Sanchez. Mumbling in heavy despair, the Duke sorrowfully confesses that he has completely failed his precious daughter. Desperately pleading for her attention, the devastated father furiously questions his own worth for failing to protect his own child. Standing with absolute resolve, Carolina firmly assures him that he made the correct choice and fully embraces her heavy responsibility. Filled with bitter regret, Raymond solemnly doubts whether an agonizingly absent father truly deserves to hear such comforting words. Gazing at her softly, he warmly realizes that she is truly exactly like her late mother Karen. Gasping in pure surprise at the unexpected comparison, she listens as her father notes their entirely different eye and hair colors. Smiling warmly, he affectionately points out her truly charming demeanor and stubborn inability to leave well enough alone. A heavy wave of nostalgia washes over the Duke as he softly admits those specific traits fiercely remind him of Karen. Tears instantly well up in Carolina's wide eyes as she silently absorbs her father's deeply loving revelation. Understanding dawning beautifully, she gently realizes that his highly precious words finally completely healed her shattered heart. Eagerly stepping forward, the overjoyed daughter excitedly asks to hear more about her late mother as he immediately agrees. Basking in his newfound warmth, Carolina happily reflects that she has finally achieved a true sense of belonging. Standing solemnly before a grand stone monument, the pair quietly visits the beautifully preserved resting place of Karen Sanchez. Kneeling respectfully, the grieving Duke greets his lost love and gently announces that their precious Carolina is already 16. Staring fondly at the intricate gravestone, he proudly declares that the beloved child has finally blossomed into a beautiful woman. Bowing his head deeply, the heavily burdened man begins to mumble indistinctly about his own terrible failures as a father. Straining to hear his hushed apologies, Carolina catches fragmented whispers about his devastating inability to protect her and spend time together. Standing back up gracefully, the Duke warmly encourages Carolina to boldly step forward and speak her own piece. Greeting her mother with a bright smile, Carolina bravely announces that she is officially getting married after so much has happened. Hesitating slightly, she nervously reveals that her terrifying new fiancé is actually the second prince of Malcosias. A gentle breeze softly sweeps across the silent graveyard as she violently wrestles with her own deep insecurities. Clutching her chest tightly, the young girl tragically asks if her mother is truly glad she was the one who survived. Trembling slightly, Carolina sorrowfully admits she completely lacks her father's immense capabilities and Flora's exceptional holy magic. Staring sorrowfully at the cold stone, she agonizes over the heavy thought of what would have happened if her mother had survived instead. Gripping her delicate dress, she tragically confesses that this devastating thought continuously haunts her mind over and over again. Hearing her father call out anxiously, Carolina fiercely shakes off the dark thoughts and firmly states she needs no answer. Smiling bravely through her lingering doubts, she openly admits her deep uncertainty about bravely facing her rapidly approaching future. Standing incredibly tall, the determined girl fiercely asks her mother to watch closely as she boldly promises to make her extremely proud. Turning back to her waiting father, Carolina brightly declares that she has finally said absolutely everything she heavily needed to say. The silent pair stands together in beautiful solidarity as a warm breeze gently rustles the vibrant graveyard trees. A highly serene and genuinely breathtaking smile finally completely brightens Carolina's previously sorrow-filled face. Bathed in the warm sunlight, the highly resolute girl looks absolutely radiant as she entirely sheds her crushing past burdens. Looking back one final time, she deeply and passionately thanks her beloved mother for absolutely everything. Exactly 3 rapidly fleeting days later, a lonely carriage loudly clatters toward the highly tense Celestia Malkosia's border. Riding alongside her quietly, King Nathan smoothly explains that her crucial escort absolutely cannot be a highly visible royal parade. The king casually admits that the highly secretive arrangement is rather underwhelming for such a monumental political sacrifice. He firmly reveals that she will officially rendezvous with the highly dangerous Pyreborn Knights returning from their latest brutal expedition. King Nathan strongly urges her to fiercely seize this dangerous opportunity to directly know her terrifying fiancé, Commander Prince Edward. Staring thoughtfully out the rattling window, Carolina notes the highly unusual mindset of Imperial Knights proudly recruiting commoners into their ranks. Bowing gracefully before the highly imposing Pyreborn Knights, Lady Carolina Sanchez formally introduces herself as the second-born daughter of Duke Sanchez. Expressing her absolute deepest gratitude, the trembling noblewoman officially places her fragile life completely under their stalwart military protection. A heavy crimson cloak violently flutters in the fierce wind as a highly intimidating presence rapidly approaches the terrified girl. Heavy armored boots menace the silent atmosphere, loudly crunching against the hard earth with absolutely devastating weight. Gasping softly in complete awe, Carolina instantly realizes that the rapidly approaching monstrous man is truly him. Staring upward in absolute terror, she violently trembles as a legendary, battle-hardened warrior directly confronts her. Shrinking completely beneath his highly overwhelming presence, she genuinely feels exactly like a helpless mouse trapped inside a terrifying lion's den. Her widened eyes instantly fixate upon his untamed, violently fiery red hair blazing beautifully against the harsh sunlight. Piercing directly through her weak defenses, his striking golden zircon eyes glare outward from a brutally cold and totally impassive visage. Looming over her like a massive mountain, his hulking and completely overwhelming physical stature aggressively casts a highly dominant shadow. Acknowledging her presence by formally speaking her name, the gigantic prince prompts a highly nervous stammer from the terrified noblewoman. Expressing highly unexpected grace, the imposing giant sincerely thanks her for enduring such an incredibly long and deeply exhausting journey. Utterly shocked that a supreme royal prince would actually bow to her, she actively listens as he formally introduces himself as the second crown prince of Malkosias. Revealing his full royal name as Edward Ruby Martinez, he highly humbly commands the deeply confused lady to freely address him however she wishes. Utterly stunned by his gentle royal etiquette, Carolina totally marvels at how exceptionally well-mannered the terrifying beast truly behaves. Grasping her highly delicate fingers, the brutal warlord shockingly proves perfectly willing to warmly shake a noble lady's hand as a complete equal. Wincing sharply in sudden intense pain, Carolina lets out a tiny yelp as his massive, monstrous grip completely accidentally crushes her fragile hand. Flailing his giant arms in absolute total panic, the gigantic prince frantically apologizes while highly nervously admitting he frequently forgets his own monstrous physical strength. Sighing heavily with immense verbal disappointment, an elegant new voice suddenly interrupts the incredibly awkward and highly painful exchange. Ruthlessly scolding his imposing royal master, the refined man aggressively demands that the imperial prince finally act with proper decorum instead of bowing casually. Staring in sheer total astonishment at the breathtaking newcomer, Carolina totally distractedly notes just how incredibly pretty his highly delicate features appear. Terrified for the extremely beautiful man's fragile life, she frantically wonders how anyone could dare speak so aggressively to the wildly bloodthirsty imperial prince. Trembling violently with deep visible chagrin, the absolute terror of the bloody battlefield shockingly offers a highly meek apology to his gorgeously refined subordinate. Her fragile mind completely shatters at the highly absurd sheer impossibility of a mere loyal counselor openly scolding an imperial prince directly in front of his elite troops. Roaring loudly with totally boisterous laughter, the fierce Pyreborn knights openly and playfully tease their notoriously highly awkward royal military commander. Continuing their highly raucous public mockery, the heavily armed soldiers enthusiastically violently laugh at their supreme leader's wildly embarrassing public social blunder. Noticing a highly dangerous twitch violently forming on the publicly humiliated prince's cold face, Carolina totally panics that his legendary bloody wrath is finally aggressively boiling over. Smoothly intervening before utter bloody disaster strikes, the highly beautiful man gracefully steps forward and politely offers his own highly sincere apology for the royal indiscretion. Bowing deeply with absolute flawless elegance, the breathtaking man officially formally introduces himself as Teodor Garcia, the highly esteemed royal counselor. Gasping heavily in absolute complete shock, Carolina instantly violently recognizes the highly famous legendary name of the brilliant Lord Teodor. She rapidly frantically recalls that this incredible Viscount's son directly serves as the famed grand strategist whose brilliant tactical mind consistently guaranteed endless nightly victories. Acknowledging that the fierce Pyreborn's terrifying meteoric military rise completely relied entirely upon his brilliant masterful contributions, she highly warily notes his extremely disarming smile. Piercing directly straight through her fragile terrified soul, the master strategist's calculating eyes heavily and totally silently violently scrutinize the highly anxious political bride. Dark violent rumors loudly proclaimed that his incredibly sharp tactical intellect alone functionally powerfully serves as a massively overwhelmingly destructive military weapon. Adding highly terrifying absolute magical prowess to his brilliant sharp mind, the tremendous Grand Mage reportedly masterfully commands absolutely every single destructive school of the arcane arts. Gripping her delicate dress highly tightly, she bitterly silently remembers that while flawless Flora effortlessly wields exceptional holy magic, she herself completely utterly lacks any magical aptitude whatsoever. Trembling uncontrollably before the totally legendary tactician, the highly wildly insecure girl shockingly realizes she never expected to stand face to face with such an overwhelmingly widely renowned powerful individual. Extending a highly polite inviting hand, Teodor totally gracefully warmly guides her directly toward the waiting imperial carriage so they can properly safely discuss her rapidly impending political marriage. The massive heavily armored imperial carriage loudly rapidly rumbles and heavily violently rattles forcefully down the rough dirt road as their highly fateful political journey finally decisively begins. Visibly nauseous, the young woman struggles against overwhelming motion sickness. The carriage shakes and rattles violently, proving far harsher than anything she is used to. Unable to concentrate, she is startled when the eye-patch-wearing prince checks in on her. Noticing her pale complexion, he directly asks if she is feeling unwell. He suggests getting fresh air or slowing the driver down, though she nervously declines the offer. Closing her eyes, she takes a deep, steadying breath to calm her churning stomach. She formally thanks His Highness, apologizing for causing him any unnecessary trouble. The harsh rattling continues, as military carriages sacrifice comfort for maneuverability. He casually notes that cadets getting sick is an amusing tradition, though she finds no humor in it. A bespectacled official interrupts, redirecting their attention to the upcoming schedule. He shockingly declares that her marriage ceremony will take place exactly 1 month from today. Stunned, she questions the rushed timeline, believing royal engagements are supposed to be drawn-out affairs. He seamlessly continues, stating the wedding will be officially proclaimed across the entire nation at the Founders' Day fete in just 2 weeks. She panics as he rapidly lists the imperial etiquette and homemaking customs she is expected to master in that single month. Overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of learning everything, she silently screams in utter disbelief. Regaining a fraction of her composure, she nervously suggests that the schedule is awfully unreasonable. The official smiles smoothly, acknowledging the rushed nature of the moving pieces while begging for her understanding. He swears on the emperor's name to support them and ensure the ceremony's success, completely missing the actual source of her anxiety. She knows the highly advanced nation of Malkosias could easily organize such a massive event with its superior economy and technology. The logistics of the event are not what truly troubles her mind. Her real, paralyzing fear is whether she will be able to keep up with their immense expectations. She sullenly reflects on how effortlessly her sister Flora would have handled this exact scenario. Flora could comport herself flawlessly, even while residing as a noblewoman in a foreign nation. Painfully accepting reality, she reminds herself that she is not her sister, but rather the Sanchez family disgrace. Clenching her hands together in renewed determination, she vows to simply do her absolute best. The prince silently observes her quiet, intense resolution. The heavy military convoy continues its journey, rolling into the shadowy, dense forest. Armored knights efficiently establish a secure campsite in a woodland clearing. Peering out the carriage window, she quietly marvels at how the knights set up their camp. She ponders the confusing necessity of traveling covertly with the Pyreborn's convoy to avoid arousing suspicion among the local nobility regarding the prince and a foreign noblewoman. While acknowledging the sound reasoning, she sighs over the extreme inconvenience of only being allowed a single handmaiden. She recalls her life back home, where she was constantly surrounded by an army of handmaidens who waited on her hand and foot. Reflecting further, she realizes she had no real complaints about her past life, aside from the relentless harassment from Flora and her servants. She wonders if her father ever knew the true, cruel nature of her relationship with Flora, or who put the idea in her head that she was a disgrace. Acknowledging that she never made an effort to know him while he was away on kingdom business, she decides she cannot truly blame him. Despite the lingering family trauma, she fiercely resolves that she will not miss her sister's abuse or being made the laughingstock of high society. A wave of sorrow hits her as she realizes she has now permanently lost the chance to ever connect with her father. She exhales a heavy sigh, deeply mourning the unfortunate turn of events. A young handmaiden interrupts her melancholy, respectfully asking the lady to accept her apologies. Colette laments how unthinkable it is to make the daughter of a Celestian duke sleep on the hard ground with the rest of the camp. Carolina assumes Colette must have mistaken the reason for her sigh as the handmaiden explains she asked for an inn. Colette angrily rants about her denied request, explaining the knights cited safety concerns and refused to barge into town to avoid arousing suspicion. Carolina quickly waves off the girl's frantic and sincere apologies, offering a gentle, reassuring response to ease her handmaiden's obvious distress. Feeling genuinely flattered by the handmaiden's relentless hard work for her sake, Carolina gracefully accepts the strategic reasoning behind their rugged woodland campsite. Deeply moved by this unexpected humility from a highborn lady, the maid passionately praises Carolina's boundless kindness. Flustered by the noblewoman's gentle grace, she urgently insists that Carolina's gracious words bring immense honor to their entire retinue. When kindly asked for her name, the overwhelmed handmaiden introduces herself simply as Colette, quickly emphasizing her lowly status as a mere commoner. Overwhelmed by the incredible honor of Lady Carolina personally asking for her name, Colette nervously laughs off the lady's humble and unpretentious demeanor. A sudden, piercing clang of metal violently shatters the peaceful quiet of the evening camp. Panic instantly erupts across the campsite as a desperate voice screams out for Pyreborn, frantically delivering an incredibly urgent military report. The terrified scout shrieks that hostile bandits are rapidly approaching their vulnerable position from the dense southern woods. Shocked that mere bandits would dare to boldly attack a heavily armed imperial convoy, the commander fiercely orders his hardened men to arms. Urgently pushing her lady down for safety, Colette orders Carolina to stay hidden inside the carriage, prompting the noblewoman to fearfully ask about her loyal maid's safety. Vowing to protect the lady's life with her own, the brave commoner fiercely tells Carolina not to worry as she prepares to face the encroaching threat. Stretching out a desperate hand, Carolina cries out Colette's name in pure terror as the loyal maid rushes into the perilous darkness. Left completely alone in the oppressive shadows, the terrified noblewoman braces herself for the impending slaughter as tension chokes the air. The heavy wooden carriage trembles violently as the chaotic, thundering fury of the ambush fully erupts all around her fragile sanctuary. Lethal weapons whistle through the air and clash with brutal, terrifying force, indicating that the fierce fighting is happening right outside her flimsy wooden doors. Blood-curdling screams and the horrifying, metallic sounds of deadly combat completely envelop the violently trembling noblewoman. The relentless trembling of the cart and the sheer, overwhelming terror of the unseen massacre make her stomach churn with sickening dread. Paralyzed by a rapidly rising panic, she agonizingly imagines the horrific fate awaiting her if the ruthless attackers successfully breach the carriage doors. Violently shaking her head against the encroaching despair, she desperately refuses to let her life end in this nameless, blood-soaked forest. Clinging fiercely to the monumental promise she recently made to her father, she finds a burning, desperate reason to survive the deadly night. Gripping her chest in sheer defiance, she silently screams that her life cannot possibly end here in the middle of this chaotic bloodbath. Shadowy figures violently clash in the deadly night as the chaotic sounds of the brutal massacre reach a fever pitch right outside the carriage walls. A massive, deafening explosion abruptly rocks the entire battlefield, unleashing a tremendous shockwave of sheer destructive force. Blinding flames suddenly engulf her vision, filling her with absolute, paralyzing terror as she realizes her wooden sanctuary is now actively on fire. Thick, suffocating smoke and roaring flames rapidly consume the splintering wood, violently transforming her fragile carriage into a blazing inferno. Choking violently on the toxic, black smoke, absolute despair washes over her as she realizes she is completely trapped within the burning wreckage. Heartbroken and rapidly fading from the searing heat, she offers a tragic, silent apology to her distant father for failing him. Surrendering her fading consciousness to the all-consuming flames, she somberly accepts that this horrific blaze is where her pathetic story finally concludes. A cruel, hallucinated voice of her sister Flora seemingly mocks her from within the blazing fire, sadistically asking if this is a fitting end to her disgraceful existence. Disoriented by the suffocating heat and the phantom mockery, she weakly wonders if that venomous voice truly belonged to her cruel sibling. Suddenly, a commanding, powerful presence violently breaches the blinding, impenetrable wall of searing flames. Cutting through the deafening roar of the raging fire, a firm and strangely familiar voice fiercely orders her to pull herself together. The eye-patch-wearing prince boldly materializes from the very heart of the inferno, vehemently declaring that he cannot allow her to die on him now. Reaching his strong, scarred hand right through the deadly blaze, he fiercely grounds her to reality by powerfully calling her his bride-to-be. Securing a tight, unyielding grip on her arm, the fearless prince commands her to hold on as he single-handedly rescues her from the fiery jaws of death. Stepping out of the blazing inferno, the eye-patch-wearing prince carries her safely away from the destroyed carriage. Gazing up at her savior in absolute awe, she softly murmurs his royal title. Flustered by his sudden intimacy, she mentally panics over how incredibly close his handsome face is to hers. Shattering the tense silence, he casually confesses that the intense fire magic was entirely his own doing. Extinguishing the lingering flames, he explains he ignited the blaze hoping it would prevent the approaching bandits from getting too close. He sheepishly admits that his embarrassing lack of control tragically caused her wooden carriage to burn as well. Brushing off the catastrophic loss, she quickly assures him she is unhurt while he worriedly checks on her condition. When she anxiously asks about the attackers, he confidently reveals that the restrained bandits are pretty much handled. A frantic knight suddenly sprints into view, urgently yelling for the commander while reporting that Theodore is pursuing the remaining stragglers. Panting heavily, the desperate soldier declares that the commander's immediate presence is required at once. Panic strikes as the scout reveals something terrible has just happened to Colette. Struck by pure terror, she gasps in horror at the sudden, horrifying news. Wasting no time, they sprint frantically through the chaotic encampment toward the makeshift medical tents. The harrowing night officially transitions into the grim reality of Chapter 3. Pushing past the heavy canvas flaps, she steps hesitantly into the dimly lit, rustling medical tent. A shocking and gruesome sight instantly paralyzes her where she stands. Desperate medics frantically cast glowing healing magic over a severely battered body. Lying in a pool of his own blood, Colette wheezes and pants as he fights for every agonizing breath. Reaching out a trembling hand, she steps forward to comfort the critically injured young man. Stepping swiftly into her path, the protective prince solemnly orders her to look away from the horrific carnage. A grim medic reports to the commander that the young man suffered 2 vicious abdominal stab wounds and a thigh arrow that heavily damaged his organs. The defeated healer solemnly explains that even their strongest holy magic has completely failed to stop the catastrophic bleeding. Hanging his head in despair, the medic grimly concludes that Colette is undoubtedly going to die at this current rate. The anxious commander insists they desperately need Teo's advanced holy magic to save the dying boy. Gritting his teeth in pure frustration, the prince fiercely notes that their best healer has yet to return from his pursuit. Trembling violently, she agonizingly blames herself for the entire catastrophic tragedy. Tears welling in her eyes, she realizes Khalid was brutally struck down solely because he tried to protect her. Offering a gentle comfort, the prince firmly assures the weeping noblewoman that she did absolutely nothing wrong. Hoping to spare her from the trauma, he politely requests that she immediately retire to the adjacent tent. He declares with unyielding conviction that witnessing this gruesome death is simply not a burden she should have to bear. Stunned by his suggestion to flee, she questions the very idea of retiring while her protector bleeds out. Her heart shatters as she realizes a pure soul who showed her nothing but absolute kindness is fading away. She refuses to abandon him while he violently dies right in front of her very eyes. A crushing wave of reality hits her as she realizes staying will not magically change his grim fate. The cruel, hallucinatory voice of her sister violently mocks her as an utterly worthless failure. She bitterly reflects that the magically gifted Flora might have effortlessly healed him if she were standing here instead. Staring at her empty hands, she tragically accepts her status as an utterly powerless disgrace. Despite her complete lack of magical ability, she vividly remembers the profound care the dying boy showed her. Refusing to run away, she tearfully declares her unwavering resolution to simply stay by his side until the bitter end. Desperate tension suffocates the dim medical tent as the healers labor frantically over the dying boy. Nodding in grim acceptance, the eye-patch-wearing prince solemnly understands her unwavering resolve to stay. Clasping her trembling hands together, she fervently prays to God for a miraculous intervention. Tears cascading down her cheeks, she desperately begs the divine to spare Khalid's fading life. Grief shattering her heart, she vividly remembers how valiantly the brave guard battled to keep her safe. Trembling violently, she pours her entire soul into one final, desperate plea for his survival. A sudden, brilliant burst of ethereal light miraculously erupts from her tightly clasped hands. Glittering particles of divine energy mysteriously cascade down upon Khalid's broken, bleeding body. The dazzling illumination rapidly spreads across the grim tent and bathes the entire room in a heavenly glow. Stunned by the blinding radiance, the exhausted medic gasps in sheer disbelief at the unfolding miracle. Watching in absolute shock, the medical team realizes Khalid's fatal wounds are actively sealing shut. The prince stares in stunned silence as the catastrophic injuries completely vanish without a single trace. Baffled by the impossible sight, the frantic medic violently denies that his own magic could have triggered such an event. Lady Carolina gazes blankly at her own glowing hands in absolute, paralyzing bewilderment. Demanding immediate answers, the prince fiercely asks if she personally summoned this miraculous healing magic. Waving her hands in absolute panic, she frantically insists that she is a completely non-magical person. She frantically explains that Celestian aptitude exams definitively proved her complete lack of magical attunement during her youth. Puzzled by her vehement denial, he sharply questions who else could have possibly summoned such monumental power. Before they can unravel the profound mystery, the tent flaps violently burst open with a sudden shout. Panting heavily from a desperate sprint, Theodore crashes into the tent and urgently demands an update on Khalid's condition. Stopping dead in his tracks, Theodore stares dumbfounded as the medic plainly reports that the boy is already fully healed. Later that night, Carolina lies awake in her lonely bed, fighting a bone-deep exhaustion that refuses to grant her rest. Staring blankly into the shadows, she realizes far too much chaotic madness happened today to allow her any peace. Relief washes over her as she recalls Theodore's promise that Khalid would survive, yet the mystery of his healing heavily haunts her mind. Gripping her trembling hands together, she realizes the sheer terror of the bandit ambush still courses violently through her veins. A deep, commanding voice suddenly shatters the quiet night by softly calling out Lady Carolina's name. Startled by the rustling canvas, she gasps in shock as Prince Edward unexpectedly appears outside her tent. Bowing frantically, she hurriedly apologizes for her unsightly appearance while he smoothly dismisses her frantic worries. Gathering her scattered wits, she nervously asks why the royal prince is wandering around completely alone without his guard. Meeting her gaze calmly, he simply explains that he stepped away to get some much-needed fresh air. Gesturing to the quiet campfire, the imposing prince gently asks if he might join her for a moment. Internal panic violently grips her chest as she processes the terrifying reality of being completely alone with Prince Edward. Glancing nervously at his rugged frame, she frantically wonders what they are even supposed to talk about. Catching a glimpse of his unarmored physique, she flusteredly notes just how incredibly chiseled his body truly is. Heat rushing to her cheeks, she marvels at his stunningly regal and undeniably handsome facial features. Her heart violently pounds in her chest as she fully realizes this striking warrior is the man she is destined to marry. Interrupting her frantic thoughts, he softly calls her name and sincerely thanks her for staying with Collet. Stuttering in complete surprise, she asks why His Highness would thank her for merely showing basic bravery. Staring into the dancing flames, the prince somberly reflects that knights know every fleeting moment could be their last, as brothers lost in battle may vanish by the next day. Prince Edward solemnly remarks that he has seen countless men completely crumble under the heavy weight of despair. He softly adds that it is never an easy task to stand by someone during their darkest and most harrowing hour. Gazing into the crackling fire, Carolina humbly admits that standing by the wounded is about all she can genuinely do. She sorrowfully confesses that she can offer very little in return to the brave soldiers who willingly risk their lives for her. Prince Edward stares intently at the downcast noblewoman and marvels at her surprisingly conscientious nature. Acknowledging his own flaws, the imposing prince plainly admits that he completely misjudged her true character. He honestly confesses that he initially assumed she was just another coddled aristocrat like the rest of the high nobility. Locking his eye onto hers, the royal commander firmly declares that she is absolutely nothing like those arrogant elites. He warmly praises her indomitable spirit by noting that she possesses an incredibly astonishing tenacity. Haunting echoes of her cruel past violently clash with his unexpected praise as she remembers being endlessly mocked as a useless disgrace. The warm memory of Collet sincerely calling her kind swiftly pushes away the lingering darkness of her traumatic past. Feeling deeply moved, she states that everyone here has shown her nothing but kindness before bravely turning the question back to His Highness. She gazes directly at the fearsome warrior and boldly declares that he possesses a remarkably gentle and compassionate soul. Completely caught off guard by her bold words, the scarred prince stammers in pure confusion at being called gentle. Smiling warmly, she explains that she sees his true nature because he just bestowed such incredibly kind words upon her. She passionately points out that it is clear as day how deeply his hardened men respect and admire him. Elaborating on her observation, Carolina insists that he is a highly considerate leader who remains constantly mindful of those around him. Internally, she frantically wonders why the mighty empire champions such a caring man as an unfeeling, bloodthirsty warrior. Leaning in closer, Edward intensely questions whether she truly speaks those complimentary words straight from her heart. Blushing slightly under his intense gaze, she firmly assures His Highness that she means every single word. A soft and vulnerable expression crosses his rugged features as he quietly absorbs her unwavering sincerity. He humbly confesses that she is the very first noble lady he has ever met who has spoken to him with such genuine kindness. Captivated by the surprisingly kind expression on his handsome face, she realizes they both still have so much to learn about one another. Blushing furiously, she happily agrees when the prince tentatively asks if he can drop the formalities and simply call her Carolina. Elsewhere in the shadowy camp, a mysterious figure scratches a grim tally mark into a surface and ominously notes that makes 12. The mysterious scholar intensely ponders the highly concerning data gathering right before his vigilant eyes. Holding a glowing magical artifact, Theodore meticulously reviews the strange anomalies afflicting their quiet encampment. Theodore grimly deduces that the magical energy of exactly 12 people, including Prince Edward, has completely run amok. Trying to solve the perilous mystery, he sharply wonders if this chaos was caused by the bandits or some cursed effect of the land itself. A dark and unspoken suspicion violently crosses Theodore's mind as he considers a far more sinister possibility. Clenching the glowing artifact, the determined investigator vows that the underlying reason truly does not matter right now. Stepping into the darkness, Theodore fiercely declares that there is only one dangerous way to uncover the absolute truth. A grand geographical map reveals the massive empire of Malcosias, famously known as the Ruby Empire, which dominates most of the continent. Sweeping historical records show how the aggressive empire rapidly expanded its borders through brutal war and conquest over 7 centuries. Ancient tapestries vividly depict the legendary first emperor, widely revered across the vast lands as the almighty grand sage. Sitting in a lavish imperial classroom, Carolina notes that this intense style of teaching is vastly different from her lessons back home. Staring at her towering stack of books, she exhaustedly reflects that they only arrived in the majestic capital of Malcosias just yesterday. She vividly recalls being formally granted a highly intimidating audience with the reigning emperor and empress upon her arrival. Surrounded by royal tutors, the determined noblewoman promptly begins her rigorous and exhausting studies to become a proper imperial consort. Reviewing her new study materials, Carolina confidently absorbs the incredibly straightforward foundational texts. She quickly realizes these advanced imperial texts feature a vast array of distinguished historical figures unlike her ancestral records back home. Glancing at her tutor, she genuinely worries for the exhausted Theodore as dark shadows severely stain his sunken eyes. Shifting her gaze across the room, a sudden spike of nervous curiosity violently grips her attention. Shock completely overwhelms her as she desperately questions why Prince Edward silently occupies a seat inside her quiet classroom. Blushing furiously, she frantically questions why the stoic prince keeps casting such intense glances directly toward her desk. Breaking the awkward tension, Theodore smoothly transitions their rigorous lesson directly into advanced magical studies. The weary scholar strictly defines the concept of magic as the supernatural manipulation of raw arcane energies. He expertly dictates that these potent energies manifest in various elemental aspects which human bodies inherently struggle to fully channel. Theodore elaborates on the common global misconception that a child's magical affinity remains completely innate and unchanging forever. Shattering her entire worldview, he boldly declares that this rigid societal assumption entirely lacks any actual factual basis. Leaning forward in absolute shock, the stunned noblewoman urgently demands to know if this revolutionary revelation genuinely holds true. Painful memories instantly flood her mind as she vividly recalls failing her childhood aptitude exam at a mere 6 years of age. He calmly clarifies that the Ruby Empire rigorously mandates aptitude testing at both 5 and 16 due to wildly unstable childhood magical traits. Continuing his monumental lecture, Theodore reveals that inherent magical affinities occasionally shift and completely change over a person's lifetime. Gripping his glowing artifact, the scholar grimly confirms that a person's magical powers completely vanish entirely under certain extreme conditions. Reeling from the sudden information overload, she realizes this perfectly explains why certain Celestian nobles mysteriously lost their profound magical abilities. She bitterly remembers her strict academy viciously preaching that losing magic served as absolute divine retribution for provoking God's terrible wrath. A spark of desperate hope violently ignites in her chest as she wonders if natural magical instability caused her own tragic flaw. Raising her trembling hand, she bravely interrupts the ongoing royal lecture with a deeply personal and urgently terrifying question. Voice quivering with hidden hope, she desperately asks if any documented cases show non-magicals suddenly developing magical abilities much later in life. Both Theodore and Prince Edward immediately snap their undivided attention directly onto the anxiously inquiring noblewoman. A heavy, expectant silence violently suffocates the quiet classroom as Theodore carefully ponders her monumentally significant question. The scholar finally confirms that historical records actually document non-magical individuals miraculously acquiring powers despite the extreme rarity of such events. Smiling gently, Theodore enthusiastically suggests they officially retest her completely dormant abilities right after the upcoming royal wedding inevitably concludes. Staring down at her empty hands, she quietly contemplates the miraculous possibility of finally developing her own latent magical powers. Crushing her own fleeting hope, she somberly dismisses the grand idea as nothing more than foolishly impossible wishful thinking. Clapping his hands together, the exhausted tutor cheerfully concludes their rigorous academic studies for the incredibly long day. A distinguished imperial attendant suddenly interrupts the peaceful room and politely begs Lady Carolina for her immediate and undivided attention. The sharply dressed royal messenger executes a flawless and deeply respectful bow before the completely startled future imperial bride. Straightening his stiff posture, the imposing attendant formally announces his solemn duty to deliver an urgent, direct message from His Imperial Majesty. Utterly stunned by the monumental royal summons, the anxious noblewoman gasps aloud in pure, unadulterated paralyzing shock. Massive imperial doors violently swing open to reveal a dazzlingly brilliant royal throne room completely bathed in pure golden light. Cold sweat violently drips down her terrified face as she stammers endlessly in absolute, paralyzing fear at the overwhelming regal display. Sheer panic totally consumes her racing mind as she frantically searches her memory for the exact protocols she strictly needs to follow. Towering over the grand hall, the overwhelmingly powerful emperor and empress sit rigidly upon their magnificently intimidating golden thrones. Crackling with terrifying invisible energy, His Imperial Majesty Eric Ruby Martinez perfectly embodies his terrifying legendary moniker as the absolute Lightning Emperor. Radiating a freezing, completely lethal aura, Her Imperial Majesty Vanessa Ruby Martinez mercilessly glares down as the mythical Frost Witch. She mentally acknowledges that the fearsome emperor carved out his legendary reputation as the world's most powerful spellsword directly on the blood-soaked frontlines. The narrative introduces a powerful mage with the rare ability to wield frost magic effectively against formidable mana beasts. Despite her power, she finds herself overwhelmed after being invited to dine with them. Sitting quietly at the grand table, she nervously realizes she is being watched very closely. The tension in the room is so palpable that she hasn't even touched her food. Sweating under the immense pressure, she wonders if this intense scrutiny is a test of her matrimonial suitability. The heavy silence is abruptly broken when the imposing woman sharply addresses Lady Carolina. Glaring intensely, she asks if the repast is not to her liking since she only touched her salad. Startled by the confrontation, Carolina nervously lies that she simply had too much to eat between meals. When questioned about when she managed to do that, Carolina mentally begs His Highness not to make the situation any harder. The man smoothly intervenes, suggesting to Lady Carolina that she ate when she retired to the guest room. Flinching in sudden surprise, Carolina aggressively agrees with his convenient excuse. The woman softens her tone, assuring Carolina that she is welcome to voice any concerns if they have given her cause for discontent. Caught entirely off guard by the unexpected kindness, Carolina mutters in sheer confusion. The woman maintains her gentle gaze, reminding Carolina that she is to be part of their family after all. She earnestly emphasizes to the young mage that it is not their wish to discomfort her in any way. While the man wonders if she dislikes fish or feels unwell, Carolina internally panics over why the emperor and empress are being so accommodating to a mere duke's daughter. As he suggests having a Celestian dish made, Carolina realizes they honestly wish to get along with her. Gripping her dining utensils with sudden resolve, she decides she must tell them the truth. She confesses openly that she felt somewhat embarrassed to be scrutinized so heavily by the both of them. Apologizing profusely for causing worry, she nervously asks if her new mother and father were staring at her. The emperor smiles warmly, stating that one cannot help but stare when gaining a daughter-in-law as lovely as Lady Carolina. The empress agrees she couldn't help herself, feeling elated to finally have a daughter after only raising sons. She adds affectionately that she was completely lost in the color of Carolina's eyes. She compliments them as very beautiful, comparing their striking red hue to rubies. Carolina is stunned by the praise, haunted by past insults questioning her blood-red eyes. The emperor explains that the ruby is held in high regard in their country as the stone of victory. He recounts how the first emperor received a ruby pendant from his mother and never parted with it, even in the heat of battle. The empress smiles gently, thrilled to have a child with eyes of ruby hue marry into their family. She declares with absolute sincerity that she can think of no greater blessing. As the emperor concurs, Carolina is deeply moved, remembering how those same eyes were once called disgusting and revolting. Beaming with a bright, tearful smile, she joyfully proclaims herself so very blessed to join such a warm and welcoming family. The residual tension completely dissipates from the grand royal dining hall. The royal couple shares a highly satisfied, knowing grin with one another. The emperor notes that she is a sweet girl, and the empress expresses her happiness at hearing Carolina's kind words. Night peacefully falls over the quiet, grand exterior of the royal estate. Later in her quarters, a maid knocks on the door and respectfully asks Lady Carolina for a moment of her time. Carolina gracefully invites her inside, and the maid politely pardons her own intrusion. Standing formally behind Carolina, the maid announces she bears a message from His Imperial Highness. Turning slightly in surprise, Carolina immediately asks if the message is from Prince Edward. Carolina and her maid step into the grand greenhouse as the heavy door clicks shut behind them. Bowing deeply, Carolina formally and respectfully greets His Highness. The maid notes that the prince abruptly summoned them here to discuss a very specific matter. The prince casually credits his fire magic for the garden's unusual spring-like warmth and warmly invites Carolina to sit. He considerately instructs her to alert him immediately if the temperature ever becomes uncomfortable for her. A heavy, expectant silence blankets the elegantly lit greenhouse as they settle in. Sipping her tea, Carolina anxiously wonders why he refuses to get straight to the point of this sudden meeting. Sighing quietly, the prince realizes he wouldn't summon her at this late hour merely for idle chat. Resolving his internal hesitation, he decides to cut the tension and address the situation with absolute directness. He firmly reveals that Theodore specifically advised him to watch her closely. Recalling his tutor's exact words, he notes Theodore praised Carolina as a fascinating specimen who is remarkably hungry to learn. Theodore even suggested the younger prince could have greatly benefited from observing her excellent, dedicated example. Snapping back to the present, the prince boldly claims her studies are progressing a little too well. He voices his dark suspicion that she behaves as if she is being secretly coerced by an unseen force. Highlighting her frantic habits, he points out she takes notes as if her very survival depends on it. He bluntly observes she is trying desperately to force herself to be seen as truly exceptional. Stunned by this sharp observation, Carolina asks if Lord Theodore actually said there is a hidden story behind her actions. The prince softens his piercing gaze, admitting he originally intended to approach this sensitive topic with much more delicacy. He confesses his sheer hesitation, explaining he simply wasn't sure how to properly bring it up without upsetting her. Staring at her earnestly, he gently calls out her name to ground her wandering thoughts. He urges her to share her hidden reasons because he genuinely wants to learn more about her as a person. Gripped by overwhelming anxiety, Carolina desperately debates whether it is truly safe to reveal her deepest secrets to him. She recoils at the terrifying thought of exposing the painful truths about her past in Celestia and her fragile inner life. Clutching her teacup defensively, she deflects by insisting that her troubled past is entirely a private matter. She bows her head and declares she absolutely cannot burden His Highness with such trivial personal troubles. The prince firmly counters that despite their political arrangement, they are still destined to be husband and wife. He reaches out emotionally, expressing a profound wish for them to grow closer by actively sharing her struggles. A solemn, unwavering expression settles on the prince's face as he silently demands her trust. Stunned by his raw sincerity, Carolina sits frozen in quiet astonishment amidst the lavish tea spread. Shattering her own defensive walls, she finally stammers out the painful truth that she has a sister. The prince immediately recognizes the noble lineage, acknowledging he has definitely heard of Flora Sanchez. He remarks that Flora stands widely known as Celestia's foremost and most celebrated candidate to become the saint. He adds that popular rumors claim the sisters of House Sanchez get along incredibly well in the public eye. Grasping her cup with trembling hands, Carolina bitterly reveals that the perfect sisterly image is a complete sham. The sudden, dark confession catches the prince completely off guard and leaves him momentarily speechless. Carolina exposes the truth that while Flora publicly defends her, she actively drags Carolina down to ruthlessly climb the social ladder. She confesses that Flora actually detests her, keeping her deeply cruel true nature completely hidden from everyone else. Her painful memories surface violently as she remembers Flora constantly branding her a worthless, good-for-nothing disgrace. Staring into the dark void of her past, Carolina laments that this pathetic, broken image is exactly who she is to her sister and the entire world. Burdened by deep-seated insecurities, Carolina bitterly reflects that her own accomplishments have always been pathetically mediocre compared to her sister's gleaming perfection. Remembering the cruel whispers of high society, she recalls how the glittering elite always ruthlessly compared their absolute worth. The noblewomen would swoon endlessly over the first crown prince, loudly praising his brilliant intellect and strikingly comely features to anyone who would willingly listen. Conversely, they would sneer with open disgust at the second prince, cruelly mocking him as a violent and utterly boorish brute who completely lacked any royal grace. Startled from her painful memories, Carolina gasps as the prince suddenly leans in and gently calls out to her in the quiet, heavily sunlit greenhouse. Emitting a tiny, terrified shriek, she violently jolts backward in her elegant seat, completely caught off guard by his sudden, towering proximity. Panicking instantly, Carolina stammers out a frantic apology for oversharing, but the prince calmly reassures her that he is not actually angry about her dark confession. Taking a deliberate, heavy breath to compose his racing thoughts, he lets out a long exhale to carefully measure his next incredibly important words. Speaking with solemn sincerity, he acknowledges the immense, crushing pressure she faced growing up as a scion of a strict ducal family expected to flawlessly serve her demanding subjects. He gravely warns her that as she prepares to officially marry into the formidable imperial family, those suffocating social expectations will inevitably multiply tenfold. Spiraling back into dark self-doubt, Carolina silently berates herself for foolishly lamenting her own deep-rooted mediocrity in front of actual royalty. A traumatic memory violently flashes before her eyes, echoing the vicious, hateful family voices that constantly reminded her there was absolutely no place for a worthless disgrace like her. Shattering the oppressive silence of her dark thoughts, the prince locks eyes with her and firmly states that despite all those heavy, unyielding royal burdens, he softly but fiercely commands her not to let those crushing expectations weigh her down if they silently destroy her own personal happiness. Swearing a deeply moving vow, he promises that whenever she feels distress, he will stand resolutely as her impenetrable shield against absolutely anyone who dares to harm her in word or deed. Reaching out with overwhelming empathy, he gently acknowledges the incredibly harsh, dangerously lonely path she has been ruthlessly forced to walk for her entire life. He looks at her with raw admiration, praising the sheer, unyielding strength she needed to silently shoulder so much agonizing pain and walk this far completely alone. Overwhelmed by his unprecedented kindness, Carolina remembers how she was violently forced to swallow her sorrow and let her desperate voice be brutally silenced for years. Tears prick her widening eyes as she internally confesses how deeply and painfully she always yearned for absolutely anyone to finally just listen to her broken spirit. Staring at the massive, imposing figure of the prince sitting calmly before her, she realizes with utter shock that this incredible person has suddenly appeared in her darkest hour. A profound warmth beautifully blooms in her bruised heart as she silently thanks this remarkable man who genuinely sees her and wholly accepts her for exactly who she is. Slowly and tenderly, his large, rough hand gently envelopes hers, physically sealing the profound emotional connection blossoming beautifully between the arranged political partners. Trembling slightly at the comforting physical contact, Carolina marvels quietly at how incredibly broad, safe, and intensely warm his reassuring hands feel completely wrapping hers. Lost in the incredibly tender moment, she astonishingly realizes that she never once imagined she would ever so devoutly wish for a cold, loveless arranged political marriage to actually succeed. A fierce new hope brightly ignites within her soul, fervently praying that this fragile, unexpected bond will permanently take root and bravely blossom into something infinitely deeper and real. Morning sunlight gloriously floods the bustling royal estate as cheerful birds chirp brightly to naturally announce the peaceful dawn of an entirely new, promising chapter in Carolina's life. Standing quietly in her lavishly decorated new royal quarters, Carolina reflects that exactly one peaceful week has swiftly passed since she first arrived in the imposing realm of Malcosius. She notes that while the busy days have been incredibly long, she has happily poured all her boundless energy into eagerly preparing for her grand royal wedding next month. Smiling softly to herself as she peacefully observes the quiet room, she openly admits that living safely away from her highly toxic family has been downright, refreshingly pleasant. She breathes a massive sigh of relief, deeply savoring the absolute bliss of not having Flora and the cruel, snickering socialites of Celestia constantly poisoning her fragile mind. The tranquil morning silence is suddenly interrupted as an incredibly elegant maid gracefully enters the royal chamber and politely asks to heavily pardon her sudden imposition. Graciously accepting the perfectly brewed cup of steaming morning tea, Carolina warmly thanks the stunningly beautiful servant standing dutifully by her royal side. Carolina gently addresses the striking maid as Marissa, subtly admiring the flawless composure and striking, aristocratic presence radiating effortlessly from the calm servant. Carolina gently addresses the striking maid as Marissa, subtly admiring the flawless composure and striking, aristocratic presence radiating effortlessly from the calm servant. Carolina internally marvels at Marissa Kissinger's breathtaking, incredibly radiant features, knowing full well this astonishing woman is widely considered a top contender for the absolute most beautiful woman in the entire empire. Observing the maid's impeccably refined posture and graceful, highly noble mannerisms, Carolina wonders why such an incredibly dignified and gorgeously perfect woman is quietly working here. Profound confusion deeply gnaws at Carolina as she visibly struggles to comprehend why absolutely anyone with such obvious, commanding high society perfection would ever willingly serve as a lowly handmaiden. Pushing her heavily lingering suspicions aside for a fleeting moment, Carolina takes a long, incredibly soothing sip of the rich, beautifully aromatic tea from her highly elegant porcelain cup. Offering a polite, highly genuine smile, Carolina highly praises the delightfully perfect tea, prompting Marissa to bow gracefully and humbly thank her newly assigned lady. Despite feeling intensely conflicted and slightly intimidated by Marissa's overwhelming, flawless perfection, Carolina silently admits that navigating life in the imposing palace is undeniably much easier with such an incredibly excellent maid. A sudden, aggressive knocking interrupts the quiet moment as someone loudly demands entry. Upon receiving permission, a confident knight violently bursts through the door with a dramatic, explosive entrance. He enthusiastically greets the princess and loudly declares that it is time for them to depart. Startled by the abrupt intrusion, the princess manages only a nervous, hesitant laugh. Owen Klein, a knight serving with the Pyreborn, acts as her personal escort and travels with her constantly. Despite technically holding nobility status, Owen casually announces that a very special guest awaits her. The princess silently notes his audacious nature while he excitedly anticipates her discovering the mystery guest. She feels deeply grateful for his friendly demeanor, which comforts her like a fish out of water. She warmly thanks Owen for his continued service, a duty he proudly and enthusiastically affirms. Diligent maids silently prepare a grand, expansive hall for the upcoming royal activities. Frozen in utter bewilderment, the princess utters a confused sound as she processes the shocking turn of events. She nervously stammers, questioning if she must truly attend an imperial etiquette course under Her Majesty. The regal empress firmly confirms that she will personally instruct the stunned girl. Internal panic seizes the princess as she grapples with the terrifying prospect of personal tutelage from Her Eminence. The empress warmly explains her lifelong desire to teach a daughter after only raising sons. Stunned, the princess listens as the empress reveals she intentionally made it her business to become the instructor. As the intense lesson begins, the princess sharply realizes that she absolutely cannot afford to fail this crucial test. She politely thanks Her Majesty for her time while frantically reminding herself to maintain perfect composure in front of the empress. Blazing with newfound determination, she mentally vows to give the grueling lesson absolutely everything she has. Utterly defeated, the princess slumps heavily over her desk amidst a massive mountain of demanding coursework. The immense academic pressure mounts, making her feel as though her throbbing head will completely burst. She struggles with the overwhelming volume of information, noting that their customs closely mirror those of Celestia. When asked about her well-being, the frantic princess lies about being fine while planning a massive review session in her room. The empress gently sighs, elegantly admitting that she likely covered far too much material in such a short time. She explains that she got ahead of herself simply because the surprised princess proves to be an exceptionally apt pupil. The empress firmly reiterates her praise, leaving the princess completely baffled by the unexpected compliment. Calling her eagerness to learn a clear sign of intelligence, the empress officially declares her an exceptional student. Gripping her quill tightly, the princess lets the profound weight of the word exceptional wash over her mind. She bitterly recalls her harsh upbringing in House Sanchez, enduring constant refrains to improve her efforts as Flora continually surpassed her. Deeply moved, she thanks the empress for the kind words she desperately longed to hear her entire life. Burning with fierce determination, Carolina passionately vows to work even harder on her grueling studies. The empress gently agrees while kindly reminding her eager student to take necessary breaks. Overflowing with energy, Carolina enthusiastically agrees to the wise advice. Observing quietly from afar, Slade teasingly notes that Theodore has grown rather attached to his companion. Catching Theodore completely off guard, Slade casually clarifies that he is referring to Lady Carolina. Slade expresses disbelief that the young man who once skipped lectures for swordplay now willingly studies alongside a lady. Clearing his throat, Slade pointedly wishes Theodore paid half as much attention to his own lectures as he does to Carolina. Feeling the undeniable weight of the truth, Theodore releases a heavy, defeated sigh. A heavy silence settles between the two men as Theodore absorbs the sharp observation. Staring thoughtfully into the distance, Theodore openly concedes that Slade's assessment is entirely accurate. He gravely reflects that Carolina bears a far heavier burden on her shoulders than he ever realized. He carefully considers her identity as the younger sister of Flora Sanchez, Celestia's foremost candidate for saint. Teodor acknowledges the harsh reality that she was frequently and unfairly disparaged by those around her. Cruel gossips constantly snickered behind her back, dismissing her as the dull and unappealing Sanchez sister. Disgusted by the vulgar rumors, Teodor firmly declares that he found absolutely no truth in their malicious whispers. He deeply admires her sincere, strong will and a unique charm completely absent in the average noblewoman. His thoughts drift back to the heartbreaking moment she bravely shared the painful details of her past. She revealed enduring relentless ridicule and cruel comparisons that stretched far beyond the borders of Celestia. A profound sadness grips him whenever he fully grasps exactly how much agony she has silently endured. Driven by fierce loyalty, he silently vows to protect her from all of that suffering and whatever else may come. He stares off into the empty courtyard, his unwavering resolve solidifying into a silent promise. Listening intently, Slade raises a skeptical eyebrow and questions the absolute certainty of Teodor's bold claim. Slade admits his surprise and expresses genuine admiration that Teodor successfully broached such a delicate, deeply personal subject. Casually missing the point entirely, Teodor obliviously reveals he simply told Carolina that Slade thought she was acting strange, prompting her to confess everything. Utterly horrified, Slade stammers in total disbelief at the disastrous revelation. Trembling with mounting dread, Slade frantically demands to know why his specific name was ever brought into that conversation. Shrugging innocently, Teodor explains he just used Slade's exact words because he was unsure how else to broach the difficult question. Boiling with sudden rage, Slade furiously calls Teodor a daft idiot for repeating his private observations word for word. Slade explosively berates the imbecile for repeating behind-the-back gossip, screaming that Teodor might have alienated her completely. A panicked Teodor desperately protests that Carolina did not seem to mind, entirely missing the actual problem. Startled by the sudden intimacy, Carolina frantically thinks baring her soul to a stranger is a highly personal matter. Flustered by the awkward tension, the speaker quickly retracts their words as Carolina turns away. Teo sighs deeply while reminding his companion to consider themselves lucky for Lady Carolina's mild-mannered disposition. Pausing his apology mid-sentence, the speaker suddenly notices a strange document in Teo's hands. Teo quickly corrects the speaker's assumption by clarifying it is definitely not a bandit report. He solemnly reveals a report detailing recent sightings of wyverns, fearsome mana-beasts constructed entirely of pure magic. He emphasizes that these terrifying creatures periodically emerge from the wilderness to threaten the Empire's vulnerable populace. Pure shock registers across the listener's face upon hearing the dire and unexpected news. Reviewing the confusing document, the speaker is completely stunned to discover absolutely zero wyvern sightings recorded. Teo grimly notes how incredibly odd this absence is considering previous years always yielded scattered sightings across the Empire. He ominously confirms that not a single sighting or action report has been filed within the past week. Reflecting on their recent journey, the speaker abruptly realizes they completely failed to encounter any beasts on their way to the castle. Teo turns and solemnly addresses His Highness with a grave expression etched across his face. Presenting his professional opinion, Teo draws a dark connection between the missing wyverns and recent magical anomalies. He firmly concludes that the sudden magical flare-ups and the vanishing monsters are undoubtedly related. A heavy silence hangs in the oppressive air as the grim reality of the mysterious situation sets in. Shattering the thick tension, the princess suddenly pivots and asks Owen an unexpected question. 18. She pointedly observes that the Royal Knight's headquarters appears strangely austere for such an elite order. Dismissing any architectural interest, she claims mere curiosity while Owen chuckles fondly at the odd little lady. Blushing slightly, she demands to know if he plans to use that infuriating princess nickname forever. Owen casually flashes a grin and reveals that the nickname is undeniable proof he has taken a liking to her. Taken completely aback, the princess tentatively wonders aloud if his blunt words are actually meant as a compliment. Owen happily confirms the compliment while praising her for completely lacking the absurd daintiness and snobbery of typical nobles. He deeply appreciates that she actually greets the battered knights instead of hurling arrogant abuse at their way. He bitterly compares her refreshing kindness to the Empire's arrogant aristocrats who constantly look down on everyone regardless of rank. Realizing he had completely derailed the conversation, Owen abruptly steered the topic back to her question about the austere headquarters. Owen proudly explains that His Highness, their pragmatic commander, completely despises unnecessary showiness in his ranks. Quoting the commander's absolute law, Owen states that true knights require only raw strength and no amount of opulence will ever change that undeniable fact.